Hello friends, for today's video I wanted to go through my February to be read. And if you've seen a lot of my series videos recently, you know that I am trying really hard to either make a dent in some backlist fantasy series that I've started to get caught up, or to at least continue on if they're longer series, and then also complete series that are actually already completed. So it's pretty easy to stay caught up with the new fantasy, because with ones that were released last year, the first in a series, then their sequels, if I really loved the first book last year, their sequels are also going to be new fantasy, so I already feel like I have time for those. But I do think I have to be a lot more diligent about making time for backlist fantasy and some of these works that I've wanted to read for years, that I've said I was going to read for years, and I just really need to get around to it. So, a lot of the books on today's TBR are going to be sequels. Pretty much the majority of them are sequels, which is actually really exciting, I think. And the first one on the list would be The Trouble with Peace. At the time I'm filming this, because I do record things way in advance, I am already reading the first book, so by the time this goes up, I will probably have finished the first book, and I might even dip my toes into this one before January is over. I was thinking I would read one per month, so January, February, and then read the last one in March, but I don't know. If I can squeeze it in, I might try to read the second and third books and have them completed by the end of February. But regardless, I am so excited to be back in Joe Abercrombie's world. And I have found that with the first Law trilogy, the second one was my favorite. I loved that book. I think, like a lot of people, I'm not really outside the norm in finding that the first book was somewhat meandering. You're like, what are we doing here? What's with the hype for this series? What's even happening? And it takes a while before you really start to care and before you really feel settled in his style and his humor. I almost feel like it takes a sec to pick up on when he's being funny. There's a character that is just such a loser, and for the longest time I'm like, ugh. And then at some point it was so obvious that he was meant for us to kind of be like, oh, he's a loser. Because there's a part where the character's like looking at himself in the mirror and thinking like, I sure am good looking. And so you're like, oh, okay, I understand now. I thought before, anyway, it doesn't matter. This isn't a review for First Law, so I'll try to stay on track. The point is, I really loved the second book in that trilogy, but because of some of the themes and what Abercrombie was doing structurally and kind of dismantling some of what we'd seen previously in fantasy before, it did result in a unique but sort of underwhelming conclusion to that trilogy. However, I loved Best Served Cold, and I felt like a lot of the criticisms that there's no plot whatsoever were remedied in Best Served Cold, and we're like, oh, okay, he can deliver on his signature humor, the grimdark feeling, and interesting characters while simultaneously having a little bit of a plot. That one's very plot-centered, I would say, because it's a revenge story. And I loved it, and I was just like, okay, I feel like every single thing that he does is so intentional, and it's just getting better and better, and now having started A Little Hatred, I just feel like immediately I care about what's going on. I'm invested. I can kind of see how the pieces are coming together, because it is very turn of the century. Technology is becoming so much more a part of society, and so therefore you're finding a lot of people are being put out of work, and it's causing a lot of unrest, and people who protest are not being treated fairly, and all of these things are things I find really interesting, and I don't see that often in fantasy. So I'm really loving A Little Hatred so far, and I'm sure that once I finish it, I'm going to be very eagerly awaiting this second one. So like I said, by the time this goes up, I might have already started The Trouble with Peace. We'll see. I'm very excited, though. I might do a vlog for the first one. I don't know. We'll see. Because I just, already I feel like it's been, 4.5 minutes of me just talking about, all I needed to say was, hey, I'm going to read the next one, and instead I'm talking about Joe Abercrombie's works. Next up, we have another sequel, and that would be The Tyranny of Faith. In February, the third book to the series comes out, and I have seen Tori from the channel, Tori Morrow, who got an arc of the third one. Also, I'll have her channel linked. She's great. She was saying that she definitely feels like if you read this a while ago, you might want to revisit the end of this one, as everything that happens at the end is really relevant to what happens in the third book. And so I'm really excited to pretty much just read the second book and segue right into the third one. And I'm really excited because I requested the audiobook from the Libby app, which is through my library, and I got it. So this is another one that I will potentially have started or finished in January. We'll see. and maybe the third one, I'll just pick it up on release day. I am really excited. If you don't know, if you do have access to the Libby app, you can actually, when they don't have something yet, you can have a notification that as soon as it becomes available at your library, they'll notify you for both ebooks and audiobooks. So I've been doing that where I'm just like, please let me know when it's available so that hopefully I can get the audiobook, because I sometimes don't get the physical copy right away, or sometimes not the case with this series, but I'm just letting you know this information. If you buy something from the UK and you're in the US, or maybe everything you get has to be internationally shipped because you don't live in the US or the UK and you have to wait for the physical copy, if you're able to request those audiobooks early and you like audiobooks or ebooks, then at least maybe there will be a way to get those things early. Also, there's NetGalley if you like those sorts of things. But anyway, the first book in that series I really enjoyed, and that second book, I had it on a TBR, and then I got sick multiple times at the beginning of last year. And I'm not the kind of person that when I get sick, I like to be all cozy with a book. I feel miserable. I don't want to concentrate on anything. I just kind of have especially when I'm feverish, which I was, I just have kind of a pity party. And I don't feel like I'm focused when I have a fever. So that one got set to the side, but then all these other library holds started to come in, and I just never got around to reading that one. So it was one I was planning to read last year. Now I'm getting around to it here, which actually worked out perfect so that I can segue into the third one. Next up, if you didn't know, what I'm doing this year with my patrons is I have a post where I ask them to let me know some of their favorite books, either from 2023 or just in general. And then what I would do is I would cut up a bunch of pieces of paper with the names of the books, and I would put it in a cup. And then each month I would draw one from the cup, and then I would either request it from my library, or if I already own it, then I would plan to pick it up. And so I went ahead and did that for this month. So we'll go ahead and segue really quick to the picking of the book. Luna, are you going to help us decide? Help us pick, actually. We have our I Am a Book Dragon, Not a Worm cup. Luna Bear is here to witness. Dawn is the one holding the camera. And our first one is, let's see, Medusa by Rosie Hewlett. Hey, thank you, Luna Bear. You can confirm the findings. No. Okay, looking for this at the library. Let's see if they have it. No titles found. My library did not have it, so I am filling out a suggest purchase, and we'll see if that works out. The book was not immediately available at my library, so I actually requested that they purchased a copy, and I believe this one is either self-published or indie published. And another goal of mine this year is every single month I want to try and read a self-published or indie published fantasy work. So I did that for last month, which was great. This month, it seems like I'll have potentially more than one if this is indeed indie, which it's kind of looking like it is. And I don't know a whole lot about this one. I kind of want to keep it that way and have it be a surprise. I did see it won some kind of award, so that's also really exciting. We'll get around to the other self-pub book in just a second, but sticking with the patron books, they're also, every month, my patrons, a lot of them are buddy reading a fantasy standalone, and this month they're reading Race the Sands by Sarah Beth Durst. I really liked her Queens of Renthia series, and I didn't love the conclusion, but I still really loved the series. I really liked the writing. I really liked the creativity. I liked how quick it moved. And the setting, of course, is the thing that I always highlight with that series. So I would be interested in reading something else by Sarah Beth Durst, and it worked out really perfectly that Race to the Sands is their pick for the standalone. Next up, we have the other self-pub book I mentioned. So this is called Empire of Dirt. This is part of the Echoes Saga series, and I think I'll at the end of every quarter do a self-pub wrap-up, similar to how I do new fantasy releases videos, and every 3 or 4 self-pub fantasy books I read, I'll do those wrap-up style videos for, and that way you can hear more in-depth thoughts. I'll still talk about these if I do a wrap-up style video or a random vlog or something like that, but the first one, it builds very much off of kind of your stereotypical fantasy foundation, where there's elves and there's various different creatures like dragons, and there's these magic users at this magic school, and so you have a lot of what we've seen before. But what can be tricky about that is trying to stand out, trying to still have a unique story that readers are actually going to care about and they don't feel like it's just familiar territory that we've already covered and that it's nothing new. I actually did feel like the way all the pieces were coming together was really interesting. I liked what you could argue is the main character. There's a lot of perspectives in the first book, and I did enjoy the world. It kind of reminded me a tiny bit the magic school area. It's not a magic school book, but there are some characters in a magic school area, and it made me think a little bit of Elden Ring, which was fun. I mean, I really enjoy Elden Ring. So anyway, I quite enjoyed that first book. I do think it's quite introductory. I believe this series is at least 7 books long. And I do want to continue fairly quickly because there are so many perspectives and there's so much introduced in that first book. And I feel like to really ensure that I get the intended reading experience out of this series, I don't want to wait too long between books because then I'll forget who's who and people's motivations and things like that. But I really enjoyed it. I'm really excited to see what we get with this second one. And I quite liked the narration for the audiobooks. I believe these are Amazon exclusives, Audible exclusives for the audiobooks. That's pretty common with indie authors, so I am still recommending the audiobook, even though I prefer when audiobooks are more readily accessible, but I also think it's a little different when you're self-publishing and you don't have a whole publishing house behind you. But anyway, the audiobook was quite good. I liked it a lot. After that, we have some nonfiction. So I have requested a book. I think it's the literal autobiography by Nelson Mandela because I don't really know that much about Nelson Mandela. That one's not in yet, but that is something I'm hoping to get around to. And then this next one is one that I just randomly saw at a library that my husband and I stopped in at. We went for a hike, and then on the way back, we were like, hey, we've never been to this library before. So we stopped in, and it was a really fun little library, but we were just kind of looking around, browsing, and I saw this, and I'm like, what's that? It was in the nonfiction section. It didn't look like a nonfiction book. So this is the book, and it's called The League of Lady Poisoners, and it's illustrated, and it's all about, let me see if I can actually show you some of the green is going to cause probably some interesting things to happen with the camera, but it has illustrations in it, and it tells you about these various different women who were poisoners. So it kind of takes that whole poison is a woman's weapon, and it's like, well, let's investigate that. And it kind of goes through these various different women, some of which it seemed like were pretty awesome and were using poison to help people, and then not the people they were poisoning, obviously, but because maybe the person was a bad person and they're like, I'm gonna get this person. And then sometimes they just seemed off the walls where you're like, ooh, I don't think you're very good. So anyway, it sounded fascinating. The synopsis, I guess you could say, really intrigued me. It seems like it's going to be really interesting and really fun. I feel bad saying that, but it does sound like a good time. And I think part of my interest in this comes from when I went to Ireland and I went to Blarney Castle. There is a poison garden there. And one, I was astounded that these really incredibly poisonous plants were just out, and they have little signs and they tell you what'll happen if ingested, or this one, if you touch it, this is what happens. So I'm like, what if a little kid just ran in and grabbed it or something? Anyway, it was kind of funny to me. But anyway, learning about, from reading each of the things for all of the different plants, all the various different ways that these plants could kill people, I was like, whoa. Ever since then, I've kind of been curious about how these sorts of things were used before. And anyway, I think just years later, this book is sort of completing the arc of this interest. Maybe I'll actually learn something. I'm sure I'll learn something from that. And I think it sounds really fascinating, but I also feel like it seems so morbid to say that it sounds fascinating. Anyway, back to fantasy and another sequel, another book too specifically. We have First Writer's Call. I wasn't sure if I wanted to read books in the Green Rider series every other month or every month. I'm going to shoot for every month, but this one might take a backseat to some of the other books on my TBR if I don't have the time. But I really enjoyed Green Rider. It has that kind of cozy, classic fantasy feel. The first book, our character, she finds this man who is a messenger, and he pretty much in his dying breath begs her to deliver this message that he was trying to deliver. And she's like, okay. And so then she is trying to do this, and she encounters all these various people along the way. She's in danger. It kind of reminded me a tiny bit of with the beginning of Wheel of Time and a lot of those sorts of classic fantasy where somebody who's just an ordinary person suddenly has this task thrust upon them, and then all of a sudden there's all these dangerous people after them. That's kind of a staple, I would say, in the first books in some of these older fantasy series. And the thing is, with that sort of setup, it's very easy to not get to know the character, and it can be all about the land they're traversing and the stakes, but not so much personal to the character or getting to know them or even getting to know them through other perspectives. And I actually feel like Green Rider did a great job because it has her father, the main character's father, is a perspective you get sometimes because he's wondering, where's my daughter? Where's she gone? You also get a little bit more of the politics, and you can see where maybe certain things might go later in the series. And just in general, I thought it was really well done and so cozy. I really enjoyed that first one. So I would like to continue on, and I would really like to see how the series progresses because it's not actually completed. So even though I've said this a number of times in talking about it, even though the first one was written more at a time when that was sort of the standard for fantasy, the series is ongoing. So I'm very curious to see how trends, writing style, storytelling changes might seep their way into the rest of the series. The rest of the series. I think that'll be really interesting. Next up, not a sequel, Talon Sister by Jen Williams. So I was so excited when I saw Jen Williams had another fantasy series. This is the author of The Winnowing Flame, which is one of my all-time favorite series. So I have been wanting to pick this one up. I was kind of in a mood because I think this author deserves to have her books readily available and accessible. I think that she has proven herself to be a fantastic writer, and she's put a lot of work in, and you still find that... So if you don't know what I'm talking about, with the Winnowing Flame trilogy, when I first picked that series up, it was kind of a hidden gem. I had never really seen too many people besides Petrick had mentioned it before, and yay Petrick, I'll have his channel linked. I hadn't really seen too many people talk about it, and I was like, oh my gosh, this book is so unique. It's like perfect blend of science fiction and fantasy. There's so much going on. The characters are kind of endearingly annoying, and I was so captivated. I finished the trilogy. I loved the trilogy overall. I thought it was amazing, and it was frustrating because at the time I didn't have access to the audiobooks because they were only available in the UK. And I obviously am able to read things just physically, but there are a lot of people who can't for various different reasons. Sometimes audiobooks are the only way a person can really take in a story. So that really bugged me, and I was just frustrated that there would be that restriction that you can't listen to her audiobooks unless you lived in a certain area. And then eventually the book has become a lot more popular. You actually see it sold on US retailers. Before, you usually either had to get it from a UK retailer or maybe occasionally a US one would have it available, but they still had to have it shipped from the UK. So that was all remedied, and I was very hopeful that after she finished that series, wrote other things, and came back to fantasy, that would not be an issue and that it would be available across the board. No, still, the audiobook's only available in the UK. I think the physical copy you might still have to get from just UK retailers. I might have to check that. But regardless, I figured out how to trick stupid audiobook service. So now I have the audiobook. Winter Night, the second book, which I meant to read Winter Night, complete this trilogy at the beginning of last year. I did not. There's not much else to say. Next up, we have Dark Star Burning Ash Falls White. This is the sequel to Song of Silver Flame Like Night. And I believe I've seen, because I know those titles are quite long, I think that the author actually is using, if I'm remembering correctly, she's mentioned it in her Instagram stories, that I think it follows a Chinese pattern for a certain kind of poetry. Which I think is really cool, and also it's very refreshing to not just have a blank of blank and blank kind of a title. So I like that she did something really unique with the titles, even though I have to kind of really think for a second what the names of the books are. I'm sure after I read it, it will fix itself, that problem. But anyway, I really enjoyed Song of Silver Flame Like Night. I liked the characters, I liked the themes. It is just a duology, so once I read the second book, I will be done with the duology, and I'm really excited to see what happens, but I'm also really nervous because I don't know. I feel like there is potential for something sad to happen, and I just want the characters to be happy. Next up we have... Sorry, I have things on a cart next to me and one of the books fell. Next up, we have The Ashes and the Star-Cursed King. Talk about a title that's hard to remember. So this is the sequel to Serpent and the Wings of Night. I got this, as you can see, from my local library because we'll see. I mean, I liked the first one. As far as fantasy romance goes, I do feel like we balanced plot, character development, character relationship building. I thought we balanced all of those things quite well. And I am interested to see what happens in this second book. Plus, because it's the month of February, it feels like a fitting time to pick up Romantasy. And then we have the... Oh, speaking of Romantasy, I purposely took the sleeve off in case you didn't know, but the Bridge Kingdom series by Danielle Jensen, the US hardbacks, when you take off the sleeve, they have these parts of the map on them, and it's really cool because when you put the books together, they all connect. So if you didn't know, thought I would give you that heads up. But anyway, another Romantasy where I figure this would be a good time to go ahead and pick up the sequel. The series seems to be broken up into duologies, so I've read the first duology, and this would be the end of the second duology, and similar praise that I was giving to Serpent and the Wings of Night about balancing plot and character development, character relationship building. I do feel like Danielle Jensen does that quite well. I do think I preferred what was transpiring in the couple and everything from the first two books over these two, but we'll see because I haven't yet read the second book. These are not necessarily all of the books that I'm hoping to get around to. There are going to be some new releases that I would like to get to, but with new releases it's tough because I do tend to request those from the library, so when they're available is up in the air. So I don't want to put those on my TBR and then disappoint any of you that were looking forward to me reviewing those. But we'll have, I'm sure, more new fantasy besides just the few that I mentioned here, and maybe even some more sequels, we'll see. But that's it for my February TBR. Let me know how your reading is going so far this year. Are you also trying to get through series? Are you primarily sticking to standalones? What is your reading like so far? How has January gone for you? Thanks so much for watching though. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you later. Bye.